What is up, Guardians? Jake Parker here, and now that we are in the final season of Destiny 2, before moving into episodes with the final shape, it's time for us to wrap up our Destiny 2 journey with another ranking video where we rank every dungeon ever released in Destiny 2 from Forsaken all the way to Lightfall. Each rank will be based on the total inactivity experience alone, and of course I'll go into detail about why I rank each dungeon the way that I do. And lastly, this video doesn't mean that any dungeon is bad, as all of them are extremely fun to play. If you have a favorite or your own opinion on how you'd rank each dungeon, good, I'd love for you to share in the comments below. And of course, if you like this video and look forward to more Destiny and gaming content, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to know when my next video will be live. This is all dungeons in Destiny 2 ranked. Starting our list at number 8 is the Prophecy dungeon that released in June 2020, where we see our Guardians dive into the realm of the Nine to discover the secrets of the darkness. This dungeon sees us exploring what appears to be a premonition of all of the events to follow and is magically connected to the Drifter's ship for some reason, which I'm guessing plays an allegorical or metaphorical role, since the theme of the dungeon sees us creating light and dark moats throughout the entire course of the dungeon and dunking those bad boys like Gambit in order to progress forward. With a challenging difficulty and multiple gorgeous environments, this dungeon is always a delight to run through with friends or even attempt to solo on your own. Of course, it's not without its drawbacks, such as making the wrong moats, don't you lie to me. But realistically, the light and dark mechanic to make moats seem to be somewhat hit or miss unless you were completely in the light or shadows. Not to mention that once timeless bug of entering the cube puzzle room, where trying to progress would see Guardians fly into the cube in the center of the room, get goomba'd, and die, making the dungeon almost unplayable until a fix was issued. And lastly, the loophole not only didn't have an exotic to chase, but the entirety of weapons and armor to obtain were reprised from the removed Trials of the Nine activities, so there just wasn't any uniqueness or incentive to run for roles that realistically were overshadowed by easier to obtain rewards from other playlists. Still, Prophecy is a timeless classic for the OG Guardians, and it's always a nice activity to play. Coming in at number 7 is the Duality dungeon that released alongside Season of the Haunted in June 2022, where we see our Guardians traverse the parallel universes of the Leviathan to confront the nightmares within. This was a fantastic dungeon for introducing us to new mechanics never seen to date in Destiny, such as the use of bells to go back and forth between the real and nightmare realms, and a much larger increase in enemy density to add to the challenge of the activity. This is, however, where we start to see the introduction of reusing assets that the community has been very largely vocal about, with the use of nightmare characters such as Golran, who we literally farmed the hell out of for Artifice Armor, and Kydal, who we spend the entirety of the dungeon listening to Callus rant and rave about. We even see the reprisal of the firing range from the early Menagerie days, and yeah, that just makes us sad. But moving on, the weapon rewards from Duality are some of the most recognizable in the game, such as Unforgiven, Lingering Dread, and Storm Chaser, which are all insane for ad clear and boss DPS. But aside from that, I can't even begin to count the amount of times I'm standing by a bell once it's activated and it still kills me anyways, or another member of my fire team shoots the bells and I literally fall to my death. And lastly, although the dungeon did have the Hard Shadow exotic sword to earn, it's a weapon that has literally never left my vault, since unless you build into effectiveness, Hard Shadow is just vastly overshadowed by plenty of other exotics available in the heavy slot, as it doesn't stand on its own. Ringing in number 6 is the Ghosts of the Deep, an ocean-themed dungeon released in May 2023 alongside the Season of the Deep, and sees our Guardians diving into the methane oceans of the Arcology on Titan to discover a deep, dark secret below. Ghosts of the Deep is hands down one of the most gorgeous environments ever created in Destiny, and it's not even close. By bringing in the aesthetics of the Witch Queen, Dreadnought, and underwater volcanic foliage, Ghosts of the Deep is a sheer beauty in level design, and it's simply a breathtaking experience, especially when, spoiler alert, we end up discovering Oryx's dead body resting on the ocean floor. However, what really becomes noticeable about this dungeon is its sheer length when forced to overcome the extremely slow water mechanics that Bungie is clearly forcing restrictive movement on. This is by and far the most vertical dungeon in Destiny 2, by having players to descend into the methane oceans for what feels like a slow eternity, only to rise up to the prior level and repeat over and over again, which just isn't a fun mechanic to have when Guardians who love going fast clearly can't do so. To add, rather than go from encounter to encounter fairly quickly, there's numerous areas where we see our guardians enter underwater areas to fight enemies just to return back to the ocean in a very lengthy sightseeing session that, although beautiful, undervalues the balance of the dungeon as a whole. The enemy encounters feel somewhat connected but still unique, even though no one likes getting sideswiped by the underwater knight who can just move fine underwater when you can't while searching for the runes that you forgot to remember to find. And lastly, the ungodly amount of health for every single boss in this dungeon created a huge stagnancy and feeling powerful by what felt like forced DPS cycle repeating, not to mention loadout restrictions to the final boss, as you can't use any close-range weaponry, which undermines a guardian's ability to play how they want. The true rewards for Ghost of the Deep are the highly customizable Taken King armor set, while the weaponry itself is fun to obtain, including the Navigator Exotic Trace Rifle, which I still have yet to obtain. What is a beautiful dungeon to navigate, it leaves us questioning our ability to play our guardians the way that we truly want. This is the reason why it's number 6 on our list. Bringing in our top 5 is the Grasp of Avarice, a pirate-themed dungeon released alongside Destiny 2's 30th anniversary pack in December 2021, where we explore long-remembered reaches of the Cosmodrome in search of plunder and glory. This dungeon hits hard from the very get-go by placing our guardians right in front of Destiny's first ever loot cave in the Cosmodrome, while also teaching us the pseudo-gambit auto-loot mechanic of picking up engrams and standing next to the crystal to activate it, a mechanic that very much carries through the rest of every encounter. What was loved the most about this dungeon was the introduction of traps to dungeons and the non-stop laughs and anger of opening the wrong door, stepping on the wrong plate, or even Indiana Jones-style doorways dropping giant traps on top of you. This really made players have to think about their next moves. The ambiance of pirate-themed music and nostalgic Destiny 1 music created a moment of reminiscence for OG Guardians, while giving new Guardians a feeling of wonder and excitement. This is a super fast-paced dungeon that even sees us having a small moment of SRL return, which the community has been very vocal about. But the most obvious and glaring issue of this dungeon in this encounter immediately following it with the Fallen Shield. It literally deadlocks your progression and halts any sense of speed and excitement Guardians may have had to this point. Instead of killer battles against enemies, Guardians are now forced to play pseudo-gambit across the area to kill a fallen servitor and play soccer with its dead body just to shoot it at the shield in the center of the room. A task that often fails when the launcher is pointed the wrong way or the servitor falls off the map. That also doesn't take into account that you probably forgot to deposit all of your engrams and you're left with one that kills you a few seconds later. This encounter completely disrupts the flow of the dungeon, but thankfully is followed by an awesome boss battle with nostalgic rewards such as the Echo armor set, Aya's Luna, Matador 64, 1000-yard stare, and even the Galahorn exotic. Still, that huge halt in the gameplay loop is what brought Grasp of Avarice to number 5 on this list. Number 4 in our rankings is the Spire of the Watcher, a Wild West-inspired dungeon released in December 2022 alongside the Season of the Seraph, where we investigate a recently awoken Seraph facility in search of old age answers. Not only does this dungeon introduce the new Arc Conduit mechanic that sees us activating nodes in succession to progress the encounters, it also provides some of the most badass armor ever made, where the phrase "yeehaw" does not do it justice. The dungeon sees a great blend of horizontal to vertical progression, where we traverse the Seraph Tower only to descend to its far bottom and encounter the final boss. All of the weapons to this day still have a viable presence in the sandbox, including the Liminal Vigil sidearm and reprised 7 Seraph weapons. Not to mention the possible Hierarchy of Needs exotic bow, which again, I still have yet to earn 60 runs later. Bungie, help me out here! Encounters of the dungeon just felt cohesive and each part led to the next. The only downside many were vocal about was the reuse of the Harpy boss from the Garden of Salvation raid. But even then, Bungie did a solid job of melding it into the encounter as a whole. Navigation required you to master your character's movement abilities while also mitigating damage against waves of enemies. This great amount of balance to the dungeon as a whole is what brought Spire of the Watcher to number 4 on this list. Bringing in our top 3 is the second dungeon in Destiny 2, the Pit of Heresy, released in October 2019, where our guardians dive below the surface of the moon to conquer an ancient evil stirring deep underneath. This dungeon gave us some major Lord of the Rings Mordor vibes, and also briefly introduced verticality to our progression with constantly long falls, ensuring that the architects still get those fall damage kills in. The new variants and required sword attacks was also a completely awesome addition to the dungeon experience by forcing players to strategically battle the 3 different types during the first and final encounters. whether it be the basic attack, alt attack, or even guarding. Transitions between the encounters felt just long enough to not feel exhausting, and players really felt like there was a hint of fear to every encounter that they got into. The final encounter meshed the mechanics of the rest of the dungeon together extremely well, and the risk-reward of the final boss area made the fights just that much more exciting. Despite not having an exotic to chase, the dungeon still offered extremely high stat armor, as well as the Premonition Pulse, which was only available in the dungeon and is still a hidden dominance in Crucible when used in the right hands. And the way that the dungeon incorporated the use of symbols to determine how to progress wasn't entirely in your face compared to earlier mentioned dungeons. Pit of Heresy was overall a great dungeon experience, although shockingly while making this video, I finally got my solo clear on it, and it earns one of the top spots with number 3 on this list. Number 2 on our list is where it all started with Destiny 2's first ever dungeon, the Shattered Throne. Released in September 2018 alongside the Forsaken expansion and tasking our Guardians with entering the Ascendant Realm to overcome one of the Dreaming City's toughest enemies. The aesthetic and environment of the Shattered Throne perfectly blended the feeling of the Dreaming City's Ascendant Realms with the darkness of a true dungeon. The environment perfectly contrasts the Dreaming City and really gives our Guardians a sense of being the light in the dark. What really stood out was that each encounter truly worked on their own with almost no shared mechanics between them, aside from the Ord pickup mechanic between the Ogre and the final boss. This made each dungeon encounter a much larger challenge that required Guardians to traverse carefully and think strategically about anything that might have been missed. The reprisal of this dungeon especially brought out every weapon to the front of the sandbox, and the Wish Ender quest still to this day is a must-have weapon that any Guardian should aim to achieve. Nothing felt impossible for Guardians of any skill level, and again, I was even able to complete my first solo experience while making this video. And lastly, the dungeon still remains one of the community's best places to farm, and it's that kind of remembrance, enjoyment, and fun that brings Shattered Throne to number 2 on this list. And last but not least, our number 1 dungeon on this list is quite literally the latest dungeon released in Destiny, and that is the Warlord's Ruin, released in December 2023 with Season of the Wish, which tasks our Guardians with investigating the mountains of the EDZ to confront a recently discovered Ahamkaran threat. Warlord's Ruin is arguably the best dungeon in the game because it quite literally matches the dictionary definition of being an inner tower in a castle, and gives our Guardians a sense of imprisonment and escape. We see this not only in the first encounter by being warped into cages, but immediately after when we're locked in an inceptive dungeon within a dungeon and have to break our way out just to continue. Add in the loot threshes that you find throughout your path, multiple bosses that allow you to run any build you want. Add in the loot threshes that you find throughout your path, multiple bosses that allow you to run any build you want, repeat mechanics in incredibly smooth ways, and a unique final boss that is simply incredible to battle against with an exotic sidearm to chase. This dungeon just hits every single mark of what makes dungeons a truly amazing end-game experience. The fact that players are risking their literal lives with every move they make, every door they enter, and every chest that they find, there's a sense of mystery and excitement that no other dungeon in Destiny can currently provide. This is also heightened by the new introduction of the Fireteam Finder beta, which has broken the barriers to endgame content and allows anyone the opportunity to experience Destiny's greatest endgame content. It's because of all of this that Warlord's Ruin 100% takes number 1 on this list. And there you have it, Guardians, all 8 dungeons in Destiny ranked, and I hope you enjoyed. I'd love your feedback in the comments below about where you would rank each dungeon, and of course, if you like the content, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications to know when my next video will be live. Thank you for being the reason I get to do what I do. I hope to see you in the final shape, and until the next video, Guardians, game on.